Desert Freeway Patrol discovered their own bodies. It was a quiet evening in the Arizona desert, where the sun had just dipped below the horizon. The temperature began to drop, and an eerie stillness settled over Interstate 10, one of the longest freeways in the United States. Officer Mark Thompson and his partner, Officer James Carter, were patrolling this desolate stretch of road as part of their routine shift. They had been assigned to cover this area for the past few months, and while it wasn't exactly thrilling work, they both appreciated the calm atmosphere that came with such remote territory. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple as twilight deepened into night. The only sounds breaking the silence were the distant hum of passing semis and the occasional rustling of wind through the sparse vegetation lining the roadside. It was around 7:30 p.m. when Mark decided to pull over near mile marker 247, just west of Phoenix. He wanted to check something on his patrol car's GPS system. It had been acting up all day, and James agreed to use the time to stretch his legs after hours of sitting in the cramped vehicle. "Hey, Jim," Mark called out casually. "You mind grabbing me a bottle of water from the cooler? I'm parched." James nodded without hesitation, walking around to the back of the patrol car. As he bent down to open the trunk, he noticed something odd, a faint glow emanating from inside the storage compartment. Curiosity piqued. He reached in cautiously, expecting perhaps a flashlight or some other equipment left behind by maintenance staff. But what he found stopped him cold. Inside the trunk lay two lifeless bodies, perfectly preserved and dressed in uniforms identical to their own. Their badges gleamed under the dim light spilling from the overhead lamp, bearing names eerily familiar: Mark Thompson and James Carter. James froze mid-motion, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment, he couldn't process what he was seeing. His hands trembled as he reached out tentatively, brushing against the cold metal surface of the trunk lid. A chill ran down his spine, sending shivers coursing through his entire body. What is this?" he whispered aloud, though no answer came save for the howling wind sweeping across the barren landscape. Meanwhile, Mark remained oblivious inside the car, fiddling with the GPS console. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 7:35 p.m., and wondered why James was taking so long. Growing impatient, he leaned toward the passenger door and shouted, "Jim, did you find my water yet?" There was no response. Concerned now, Mark stepped out of the vehicle and looked around. The fading light made it difficult to see clearly, but he could make out James standing rigidly beside the open trunk. Something about his posture seemed off, too stiff, too unnatural. "Jim?" Mark approached slowly, worry creeping into his voice. "You okay, buddy?" As he drew closer, James turned to face him, his expression pale and haunted. Before either man could speak, however, another sound pierced the air, a low groan followed by the unmistakable creak of metal hinges. Both officers spun around simultaneously, their eyes locking onto the source of the noise. The rear doors of their patrol car swinging wide open, a figure emerged from within, clad in a uniform bearing the insignia of the Arizona Highway Patrol. Its movements were jerky, almost robotic, as if controlled by invisible strings. The face was obscured by shadows cast by the setting sun, but there was no mistaking the outline of its features or the badge pinned proudly to its chest. Mark stumbled backward, his heart pounding like a drumbeat in his ears. Who are you?" he stammered, reaching instinctively for his holstered gun. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as though considering whether to answer. Then, in a voice devoid of emotion, it spoke. "We've been waiting for you." James let out a strangled cry, backing away until his back hit the side of the patrol car. "Waiting for us? What does that mean?" The figure took a step forward, closing the distance between itself and the two officers. Each movement sent ripples of dread coursing through their veins, freezing them in place despite every instinct screaming to run. Behind it, more shapes began emerging from the darkness, uniformed silhouettes moving in perfect synchronization, surrounding the pair like predators encircling prey. "You don't belong here," the lead figure continued, its tone monotone yet chilling. "This isn't your time. Mark finally managed to draw his weapon, aiming steadily at the advancing figures. "Stay back," he ordered, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain composed. "I swear I'll shoot," but the threat fell flat. The figures kept coming, unaffected by his show of defiance. One by one, they revealed themselves fully, each wearing the same uniform as Mark and James, but their faces were wrong. Hollow-eyed and gaunt, they bore expressions of sorrow rather than anger, as though burdened by secrets too heavy to bear. "It's not real," James muttered under his breath, clutching his own service revolver tightly. None of this is real, and yet reality refused to bend to their wishes. The figures closed in relentlessly, forming a tight circle around the two men. Suddenly, the air grew colder, suffocating even, as if the very fabric of existence had shifted beneath their feet. Light dimmed further, plunging the scene into near-total darkness, except for the faint glimmer of stars high above. "Listen carefully," the lead figure said, its voice gaining urgency. "You must leave this place before dawn breaks. If you stay, you will join us forever." Before either officer could respond, a blinding flash erupted overhead, momentarily blinding everyone present. When vision returned, the figures were gone, vanished as though they'd never existed. Only the eerie silence remained, punctuated by the distant wail of coyotes echoing across the desert plains. Panting heavily, Mark holstered his weapon and turned to James. Did that just happen?" "I think so," James replied weakly, still shaken. "But how? And who were those people?" Neither man had answers, only questions swirling chaotically in their minds. They climbed back into the patrol car, neither speaking a word, as they sped away from mile marker 247, leaving behind whatever horrors lurked in its shadowy depths. Yet, even as miles passed beneath their tires, unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of their consciousness. Days later, during a debriefing session at the local police station, Mark confided in his supervisor about the strange encounter. To his surprise, the older officer nodded knowingly, revealing tales passed down through generations of highway patrolmen. Apparently, similar incidents had occurred along this stretch of freeway over the decades, always involving officers discovering versions of themselves or worse, meeting their supposed doubles face to face. No official explanation existed for these phenomena, nor would one likely ever emerge. Some theorized residual energy from tragic accidents. Others believed spirits bound to the land sought resolution. Whatever the truth, one thing became abundantly clear to Mark and James. Some places aren't meant to be understood, only respected and avoided whenever possible. From that day forward, neither man requested assignments near mile marker 247 again. And though years have passed since that fateful evening, memories of glowing trunks and hollow-eyed apparitions continue haunting their dreams, serving as grim reminders of the mysteries hidden within America's vast, untamed wilderness.
American National Park, where campers disappear nightly. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when John, a seasoned hiker in his early 40s, arrived at Blackwood National Park. It was an expansive wilderness known for its untouched beauty and rugged trails that stretched endlessly through dense forests and towering mountains. The park was famous among outdoor enthusiasts, but whispered about in hushed tones by locals who spoke of strange disappearances over the years. As John set up his tent near Clearwater Lake, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping into his chest. The air felt heavy, as if the forest itself were watching him. John had planned this trip meticulously. He was no stranger to camping alone, having spent countless nights under the stars across various national parks in the United States. But something about Blackwood felt different, more alive, more ominous. The wind rustled through the trees with an almost deliberate rhythm, like fingers tapping against glass. Shadows lengthened as twilight deepened, casting eerie patterns on the ground around him. He glanced at his watch. It was 7:45 p.m. Darkness would fall soon, enveloping the forest in an impenetrable cloak. At precisely 8:12 p.m., John heard a faint whisper carried by the breeze. At first, he dismissed it as leaves brushing against one another. But then came the sound again, clearer this time. It wasn't natural. It sounded human, though distorted, as if spoken from far away yet somehow close enough to make his skin crawl. His heart quickened, and he scanned the surrounding woods, squinting through the dim light. There was nothing there, or so it seemed. By 9:00 p.m., night had fully descended, wrapping the park in absolute darkness. Only the moonlight filtering through the canopy provided any illumination. John sat by his small campfire, trying to shake off the growing dread. He thought back to the stories he'd read online, before embarking on this journey, tales of campers vanishing without a trace, their gear left untouched, their tents zipped shut as if they had simply walked out or been taken. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped sharply. Frost began forming on the grass nearby, despite it being late spring. John pulled his jacket tighter around him, wishing he had brought something warmer. The silence of the forest was oppressive, broken only occasionally by the distant call of some nocturnal creature. Yet even those sounds seemed muted, as if the entire ecosystem held its breath. Then, at exactly 12:37 a.m., everything changed. A sudden gust of wind extinguished John's fire, plunging him into complete darkness. Panic surged within him as he fumbled for his flashlight, his hands trembling uncontrollably. When he finally switched it on, the beam revealed something that made his blood run cold. Standing just beyond the edge of the light was a figure tall, gaunt, and eerily still. Its face was obscured by shadows, but John could swear it was staring directly at him. He froze, unable to move or speak. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as the figure remained motionless, as though waiting for something or someone. Then, without warning, it turned and melted into the darkness, leaving John alone once more. Or so he thought. For the rest of the night, John experienced phenomena he couldn't explain. Footsteps echoed behind him when he knew he was the only person in the vicinity. Branches snapped unnaturally close to his tent, and every now and then, he caught glimpses of fleeting shapes darting between the trees, always just out of reach. Each time, his flashlight failed to capture anything tangible, as if whatever haunted the forest existed just beyond the threshold of reality. When dawn broke at 6:15 a.m., John packed his belongings hastily, eager to leave the cursed place behind. As he dismantled his tent, he noticed something chilling etched into the dirt. Where his sleeping bag had lain a single word, written in what appeared to be claw marks: leave. Shaken to his core, John did exactly that, vowing never to return to Blackwood National Park. Weeks later, while recounting his experience to friends, he learned that others had reported similar encounters in the same area. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking in the woods. Others described hearing voices calling their names in the dead of night. A few brave souls attempted to investigate further, but none returned to tell their tale. To this day, Blackwood remains a mystery, a haunting reminder of the unknown forces that dwell in the wild places of America. For those who dare to venture there, the question lingers: are you truly alone in the dark, or is something else watching, waiting patiently for its next victim? Midwest Highway, where exits led nowhere, the sun had just begun its descent, casting long shadows across the Midwest landscape. It was a quiet evening in late autumn when Emma Carter found herself driving alone on Highway 47. The highway stretched endlessly before her, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through fields of golden corn and darkening skies. She glanced at the clock on her dashboard, 6:15 p.m., and sighed. Her phone's battery was dangerously low, and there was no service for miles. Emma had taken this route many times before, while traveling between Chicago and her hometown of Elmwood. But tonight, something felt different. A chill ran down her spine as she noticed an exit sign ahead that read Exit 23, Nowhereville. She frowned, confused. There was no place called Nowheresville on any map she'd ever seen. Still, curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to take the exit. As she turned off the highway, the air grew colder, and the wind howled like a mournful cry. The road led into a dense forest where the trees seemed unnaturally tall, their branches twisting together like skeletal fingers. Emma slowed her car, her headlights barely piercing the gloom. The silence around her was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath her tires. She parked near what appeared to be an abandoned gas station with rusted pumps and shattered windows. Inside, cobwebs hung from every corner, and dust coated everything. On the counter, a single newspaper lay open to an article about missing persons. Emma shivered, feeling as though unseen eyes watched her every move. She quickly stepped back outside, locking the car doors behind her. It was then she heard a soft whisper, carried by the wind. At first, it sounded distant, but soon the voices grew louder, overlapping one another, until they became a cacophony of murmurs. Panic set in as Emma realized none of the sounds came from anywhere visible. She climbed back into her car, starting the engine with trembling hands. As she drove away, she caught sight of figures moving among the trees, silhouettes too pale to be human, their movements jerky and unnatural. Back on the main highway, Emma tried to shake off the encounter, convincing herself it must have been some trick of the light or her imagination. Yet, each mile marker seemed wrong somehow. What should have been a straightforward journey back to Elmwood now twisted unpredictably. Signs pointing toward familiar towns disappeared entirely, replaced by cryptic messages like "Stay" and "Turn back." By 8:30 p.m., exhaustion began creeping over her. The endless expanse of road offered little comfort, especially as darkness deepened around her. Then, without warning, her car sputtered and died. Stranded once more, Emma stepped out into the night, flashlight in hand. The temperature had dropped significantly, and frost clung to the blades of grass lining the roadside. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man dressed in old-fashioned clothing, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He spoke softly, his voice tinged with sorrow. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, shaking his head slowly. Before Emma could respond, he vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the faint scent of earth and decay. Desperate, she walked along the highway, hoping to find help. Hours passed, and still, nothing changed. Every attempt to retrace her steps ended in failure, as if the road itself refused to let her leave. By midnight, despair settled heavily upon her shoulders. In the distance, she saw lights flickering, an old diner nestled beside the highway. With renewed hope, she approached cautiously. Inside, the diner was eerily silent except for the hum of fluorescent lighting. Booths sat empty, menus untouched. Behind the counter stood a woman whose presence sent chills up Emma's spine. Her smile was warm, yet her eyes held a cold emptiness. "Welcome," she greeted, gesturing for Emma to sit. "What can I get you?" Emma hesitated, unsure whether to trust the stranger, but hunger and fatigue overwhelmed her caution. She ordered coffee and pie, both of which arrived steaming hot moments later. As she ate, the woman leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "This road, it doesn't end," she whispered. "Not for everyone. Some people stay forever." Suddenly, Emma understood why the diner felt so wrong. The patrons who had once filled these seats were gone, their spirits lingering instead. The realization hit her like a freight train, and she bolted from the diner, abandoning her meal. Outside, the highway stretched infinitely in either direction, offering no escape. Dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Exhausted and defeated, Emma slumped against her car, tears streaming down her face. Somewhere deep within the woods, the whispers resumed, louder than before. They called her name now, insistent and unyielding. Hours turned into days, and days blurred into weeks. No rescue came. The world beyond this stretch of highway ceased to exist. Emma eventually stopped fighting, accepting her fate as one of the forgotten souls trapped along the Midwestern highway, where exits lead nowhere. And so, she joined the chorus of whispers, forever haunting those foolish enough to venture too far.
Missing Girl in Haunted House. It was a cold November evening in the small town of Blackwater, Ohio. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The air carried an unsettling stillness that made even the bravest residents uneasy. At dusk, when shadows began to stretch unnaturally long across Maple Street, one 7-year-old Emily disappeared without a trace from her family's century-old house. Her parents, John and Martha, had gone out for groceries at precisely 6:30 p.m., leaving Emily alone with instructions not to leave the property. The house itself was infamous among locals as one of the oldest structures in Blackwater, built in the early 1802 by a reclusive carpenter named Jonathan Hale. Stories about strange occurrences within its walls were whispered around campfires and shared during late-night conversations. Some claimed they could hear faint piano music playing deep inside on quiet nights, while others swore they saw ghostly figures standing at the windows before vanishing into thin air. Despite these rumors, no one dared investigate further until tragedy struck close to home. When John and Martha returned shortly after 7 p.m., they found the front door slightly ajar despite locking it securely before leaving. Inside, everything seemed untouched except for Emily's favorite scarf lying crumpled on the floor near the fireplace. Panic set in quickly as calls went unanswered throughout the empty rooms filled with antique furniture covered in dust sheets. Shadows danced eerily along the walls under flickering candlelight cast by old chandeliers swaying gently, though there wasn't any breeze present indoors. Martha remembered how earlier that day she had caught Emily staring intently out their upstairs bedroom window towards the dense woods behind the house. When asked what she was looking at so intently, Emily only replied vaguely about seeing something move beyond the trees, but dismissed it afterward, saying it must have been just her imagination playing tricks on her. That memory now haunted Martha deeply because those very woods, surrounded by tall iron fences, rusted over time due to neglect, were rumored to be cursed since colonial times according to local folklore. As hours turned into days, search parties scoured every corner of Blackwater, including nearby forest trails where some believed supernatural beings lurked waiting for unsuspecting victims. Detectives interviewed neighbors who recounted bizarre sightings, such as glowing orbs floating above rooftops late at night, or hearing unexplained laughter echoing through empty streets. One elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson mentioned seeing Emily walking hand in hand with someone invisible down Main Street just moments before disappearing completely right before her eyes. A story dismissed initially, yet added fuel to growing fears among townsfolk. Meanwhile, inside the supposedly abandoned Hale house located 2 miles away from Emily's residence, investigators discovered chilling evidence linking both properties together. Hidden beneath layers of grime covering the attic floorboards lay handwritten letters dated back centuries signed by none other than Jonathan Hale himself, detailing his pact with unknown entities, promising prosperity in exchange for sacrifices made within specific locations marked on crude maps drawn hastily alongside cryptic symbols meant presumably to summon dark forces. Among these marks clearly indicated coordinates matching Emily's home address, causing shivers down spines of seasoned law enforcement officers, accustomed dealing only with mundane crimes up until this point. Weeks passed with no solid leads regarding Emily's whereabouts, despite extensive media coverage bringing national attention onto sleepy little Blackwater. Then came reports from terrified witnesses, claiming encounters involving apparitions, resembling young girls dressed in outdated clothing, wandering aimlessly near graveyards surrounding town, accompanied always by menacing black crows. perched, silently observing scenes unfold below them, like sentinels guarding ancient secrets buried deep underground awaiting discovery once more. One stormy night, thunder roared ominously overhead, shaking fragile nerves, already frayed thin amongst remaining inhabitants, clinging desperately onto hope against mounting despair, creeping steadily into hearts, unwilling, let go missing, loved ones lost, forever, perhaps trapped somewhere between worlds, visible, merely glimpses, fleeting visions, haunting dreams, plagued restless minds, seeking answers, questions, never fully understood, explained, rationally explained, logically explained, scientifically.
Abandoned Hospital's Dark Secret. It was a chilly autumn evening when the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape of Silent Pines Hospital. Located on the outskirts of Pine Hollow, a small town in the Midwest United States, this abandoned hospital had been left untouched for decades. Its crumbling walls whispered secrets from another time, and its windows, now shattered by years of neglect, stared blankly into the distance like hollow eyes. The air around it carried an eerie stillness, as if even the wind dared not disturb what lay within. The name of the protagonist is Emily Carter, a curious journalist with a passion for uncovering hidden truths. She arrived at Silent Pines just after dusk, her car headlights cutting through the thick fog that clung to the ground. Her heart pounded against her chest as she stepped out of the vehicle, the crunch of gravel beneath her boots echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. She adjusted the strap of her camera bag over her shoulder and took a deep breath before walking toward the ominous entrance. Emily had heard rumors about Silent Pines all her life. Stories passed down through generations spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained noises, and shadowy figures seen moving inside the building late at night. Some claimed it was cursed. Others believed it harbored something far darker than superstition could explain. But Emily wasn't one to shy away from mystery. She thrived on it. Tonight, she intended to uncover the truth behind these tales once and for all. As she approached the massive iron gates guarding the hospital grounds, they creaked open slightly, as if inviting her in. A shiver ran down her spine, but she pressed forward, her flashlight beam slicing through the gloom. The main doors of the hospital groaned under her touch, protesting their forced movement after so many years of rest. Once inside, the oppressive atmosphere hit her like a physical force. Dust hung heavy in the air, catching the light from her flashlight and creating an almost ethereal glow. Every step she took produced a soft thud that reverberated through the empty halls, making her feel both incredibly alone and yet somehow watched. Her first stop was the reception area, where old records might still be stored. As she rummaged through dusty cabinets filled with yellowed papers, she found patient files dating back to the early 20th century. Many contained notes written hastily, detailing symptoms no modern doctor would recognize. One file in particular caught her attention, a case involving a young girl named Clara Brown, who had been admitted in the 1950s. According to the records, Clara exhibited signs of extreme fear and paranoia, claiming she saw dark shapes following her wherever she went. Despite numerous treatments, including electroshock therapy, Clara's condition worsened until she mysteriously disappeared from the hospital without a trace. Intrigued, Emily decided to explore further. Leaving the reception area behind, she ventured deeper into the hospital, her footsteps growing quieter as carpeted floors replaced tiled ones. The second floor housed what used to be the pediatric ward, and as she entered, a wave of sadness washed over her. Cribs stood frozen in time, their blankets tattered but intact, as though waiting for children who would never return. In the corner of one room, a rocking chair swayed gently despite there being no breeze. Emily froze, her breath hitching in her throat. That couldn't be possible, could it? She snapped a picture, her hands trembling slightly as she did so. Just as the flash went off, a cold gust of wind swept through the hallway, extinguishing her flashlight. Panic set in momentarily, but she quickly retrieved backup batteries from her bag and restored the light. Moving cautiously, she continued her investigation, each new discovery adding another piece to the puzzle of Silent Pine's dark past. On the third floor, she discovered a locked door marked with caution tape. Curiosity got the better of her, and using a crowbar she'd brought along, she managed to pry it open. Beyond the door lay a staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Hesitating only briefly, she descended, her mind racing with possibilities. At the bottom, she found herself in a dimly lit basement filled with medical equipment long since obsolete. Among the clutter, however, was something unexpected: a series of journals belonging to Dr. Jonathan Hale, the head physician during the hospital's operational years. Flipping through the pages, Emily learned of experiments conducted in secret, pushing the boundaries of ethics and morality. Patients deemed hopeless cases were subjected to procedures designed to tap into unknown realms of consciousness. Dr. Hale believed he could unlock hidden potential within the human mind, but his methods often resulted in catastrophic consequences. Several entries mentioned failures leading to severe psychological trauma or death. Others hinted at success, but at what cost? One entry, dated shortly before the hospital closed, described a breakthrough involving a group of patients who began exhibiting extraordinary abilities. However, these abilities came with a price: uncontrollable aggression, detachment from reality, and an insatiable hunger for connection with forces beyond comprehension. It became clear to Emily that whatever happened here had driven the hospital staff to abandon it abruptly, leaving everything behind. But then, something shifted in the air around her. The temperature dropped sharply, and the sound of faint whispers filled the space. Emily spun around, her flashlight sweeping wildly, but nothing was there. Or was there? From the shadows emerged shapes neither fully human nor entirely defined. They moved slowly, deliberately, their presence suffocating. Emily backed away, her pulse thundering in her ears, until she stumbled backward onto the cold concrete floor. Who are you?" she stammered, her voice barely audible above the rising tide of dread. The figures didn't respond, but their forms seemed to shift, taking on familiar features. Faces of patients long gone stared back at her, their eyes filled with sorrow and anger. Among them was Clara Brown, her wide, frightened gaze locking onto Emily's. The little girl reached out a hand, her lips forming silent words that sent chills coursing through Emily's body. Summoning every ounce of courage, Emily scrambled to her feet and bolted up the stairs, the sounds of pursuit close behind her. Reaching the main level, she burst through the front doors and sprinted toward her car, the engine roaring to life as soon as she turned the key. Tires screeched against the gravel as she sped away, glancing in her rearview mirror, only to see the silhouette of Silent Pines looming larger than ever against the night sky. Breathing heavily, Emily pulled over a few miles down the road, her hands shaking as she typed furiously on her laptop. She knew she had to document everything while it was still fresh in her mind. Hours passed as she wrote, piecing together the fragments of Silent Pine's tragic history. When dawn finally broke, painting the world in hues of orange and pink, she realized one thing with certainty: some secrets are meant to stay buried. From that day forward, Emily dedicated herself to sharing the stories of those trapped within Silent Pines, hoping to bring closure to their restless spirits. Yet, despite her efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that Clara, or whatever remained of her, was still watching, waiting for the moment when Emily might return. Lost Souls of Old Mansion. Lost Souls of Old Mansion. The sun had just begun to set over the quiet town of Elmwood, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. It was a chilly autumn evening, with crisp leaves crunching underfoot as the wind whispered through the towering oaks lining the main road. At 6:15 p.m., the old Grayson mansion, on the outskirts of town, stood ominously against the darkening sky. The once majestic estate had been abandoned for decades, its Gothic architecture now cloaked in ivy and mystery. Jonathan Carter, a local historian in his early 30s, found himself drawn to the property after hearing countless stories from the townsfolk. He carried with him only a flashlight, notebook, and an inexplicable sense of foreboding that made his heart race with each step closer to the ancient iron gates. The air grew colder as he approached, and an unsettling silence enveloped the area. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. As Jonathan pushed open the creaking gates at exactly 6:32 p.m., he noticed something peculiar about the mansion's facade. The windows, though broken and covered in grime, appeared to shift their gaze as if watching his every move. The front door hung slightly ajar, swaying gently despite the absence of wind. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside, his footsteps echoing through the cavernous entrance hall. Inside, time seemed to stand still. The grand staircase spiraled upward into darkness, its banister cold to the touch. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects frozen in expressions that ranged from sorrow to outright malevolence. Jonathan paused frequently, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through boarded-up windows. At precisely 7:04 p.m., he began documenting his observations, noting how the temperature dropped significantly deeper within the house. The first sign of strangeness occurred when Jonathan entered what appeared to be the dining room. The clock on the far wall struck 7, yet it wasn't synchronized with his wristwatch, which showed 7:08 p.m. As he examined the antique furniture, he heard soft whispers coming from behind him, a sound that made his skin crawl. Turning quickly, he found nothing but empty space where moments ago he could have sworn seeing shadowy figures moving at the edge of his vision. Moving cautiously through the mansion, Jonathan reached the library at 7:23 p.m. Here, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Books lay scattered across the floor, their pages torn and blackened as if exposed to fire. Yet, there was no smell of smoke or soot. On one of the remaining shelves, he discovered a leather-bound journal dated back to the early 1900s. Flipping through its yellowed pages, he read accounts of strange occurrences written by previous residents, disappearances, unexplained noises, and sightings of ghostly apparitions. At 7:45 p.m., Jonathan decided to venture upstairs, drawn by an irresistible pull toward the third floor. Each step creaked beneath his weight, amplifying the tension building within him. When he finally reached the top landing, he encountered a door unlike any other in the house. Carved with intricate patterns resembling human faces contorted in agony, it emitted a faint glow that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Before opening the door at exactly 8:03 p.m., Jonathan hesitated. His rational mind told him to leave immediately, but curiosity overwhelmed him. Pushing the door open revealed a room bathed in unnatural light. In its center stood a circular table surrounded by chairs, each bearing the name of someone who had once lived in the mansion. The names were familiar. They matched those mentioned in the journal entries he'd read earlier. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted further, and the air grew thick with anticipation. Jonathan felt as though invisible eyes were studying him from every corner of the room. A voice, low and mournful, echoed around him. "Why have you come?" It wasn't a question meant to be answered, but rather a statement filled with sorrow and longing. Realizing he might not escape unscathed, Jonathan attempted to backtrack at 8:15 p.m. However, the mansion seemed to resist his departure. Doors slammed shut on their own, corridors twisted into impossible angles, and the whispers grew louder, forming words that chilled him to the bone. Faces appeared in mirrors, reaching out with skeletal hands, while cold spots moved erratically throughout the space. By 8:30 p.m., Jonathan found himself back in the mysterious room, unable to leave despite his desperate attempts. The voices became clearer now, telling stories of betrayal, murder, and despair. He learned that the Grayson family had practiced dark rituals within these walls, binding spirits unwillingly to the property. Their descendants had tried to break the curse, resulting in numerous deaths and disappearances over the years. As midnight approached, Jonathan realized his only chance of survival lay in confronting the source of the haunting directly. Using knowledge gained from the journal, he performed a ritual designed to release the trapped souls. This act required immense courage, as it involved standing in the circle of power while enduring the full force of the spirit's wrath. At exactly 12:00 a.m., the mansion shook violently as the ritual reached its climax. Shadows writhed and screamed, their forms becoming more defined before dissolving into nothingness. One by one, the tormented souls found peace, their energy leaving the building entirely. When the last spirit departed, the mansion fell silent, its oppressive atmosphere lifting like a heavy fog. Exhausted but victorious, Jonathan left the Grayson mansion shortly after 1:00 a.m. Though physically unharmed, he bore emotional scars from his encounter with the supernatural. The experience changed him profoundly, making him question the boundaries between life and death, reality and illusion. In the days that followed, Jonathan documented everything meticulously, sharing his findings with paranormal researchers worldwide. The Grayson Mansion remains closed to the public, serving as a reminder of humanity's fascination with the unknown and our occasional recklessness in pursuing answers. For those brave enough to listen, the mansion still tells its story, a tale of lost souls seeking redemption and one man's journey into darkness. Vanishing Man in Creepy Motel. The Vanishing Man in Creepy Motel. It was a chilly October evening when Jonathan arrived at the edge of Blackwater, a small town in the Midwest that seemed to have been forgotten by time. The air carried an unusual stillness, and the only sounds were the distant hush of wind through skeletal trees and the faint hum of cicadas. Jonathan had been driving for hours after his flight from Chicago was canceled due to bad weather. His GPS led him to a secluded motel called the Whispering Pines, its neon sign flickering unevenly as if struggling to stay alive. The receptionist, an elderly man named Harold, greeted Jonathan with a curt nod. His voice cracked slightly as he said, "Room 13's available. Cash only." There was something unsettling about Harold's demeanor. His eyes darted nervously around the dimly lit lobby, and his hands trembled slightly as he handed over the key. Jonathan paid without hesitation, eager to rest after the long journey. As he entered room 13, Jonathan immediately noticed the peculiar atmosphere. The walls were adorned with peeling wallpaper, revealing patches of faded floral patterns beneath. A musty smell lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of mildew. The single bed looked worn but serviceable, its mattress sagging in the middle. Above it hung a cracked mirror, its surface clouded with age. To the side stood an old television set, its screen dark and dusty. Jonathan decided to freshen up before settling down. As he turned on the tap in the bathroom sink, the water sputtered out in rusty bursts, making him grimace. He splashed some on his face, then dried off with a towel that felt rough against his skin. When he glanced into the mirror above the sink, he froze. For just a moment, he could have sworn he saw another figure standing behind him in the reflection, but when he spun around quickly, there was no one there. He laughed nervously, attributing it to exhaustion and stress. Later that night, as Jonathan lay in bed trying to sleep, strange noises began emanating from the walls. At first, they sounded like soft whispers, almost imperceptible. But soon, the whispers grew louder, overlapping each other until they formed an eerie cacophony. Jonathan sat upright, his heart pounding. He grabbed his phone to check the time. It was exactly midnight. The clock hadn't moved since then, even though he knew it should have continued ticking. Curiosity, or perhaps sheer desperation, compelled Jonathan to investigate. He donned his shoes and cautiously opened the door, stepping out into the hallway. It was eerily silent, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. As he walked toward the end of the corridor, he noticed a faint light seeping under one of the closed doors. Intrigued, he approached it slowly, his breath shallow. The door swung open easily despite appearing locked from the outside. Inside, the room was eerily similar to his own, yet different in subtle ways. The wallpaper here was completely intact, its colors vibrant as if untouched by time. On the bed sat a man dressed in outdated clothing, a gray suit with wide lapels and a tie knotted loosely around his neck. The man turned his head slowly, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow yet piercing. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice gravelly and filled with sorrow. Before Jonathan could respond, the man vanished right before his eyes, leaving behind only the lingering scent of decay. Panicked, Jonathan bolted back to his room, slamming the door shut behind him. He called Harold at the front desk, his voice trembling. "Something's wrong. There's someone else here." Harold's reply was calm, but tinged with resignation. "That happens sometimes. Best you leave before sunrise." Dawn came too slowly for Jonathan. Every shadow in the corner of his eye made him jump. Every sound outside his door sent shivers down his spine. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke through the curtains, he was packed and ready to go. Harold simply nodded when Jonathan returned the key, saying nothing further. Years later, Jonathan would recount the story to friends, always careful not to mention specific details. Yet whenever he passed through Blackwater again, he couldn't help but feel watched, as if the man in the gray suit still lingered somewhere within those crumbling walls. And so, the legend of the vanishing man in the creepy motel persisted, whispered among travelers who dared to venture near the Whispering Pines. Shadow figures in empty school. The night was unusually quiet in the small town of Willow Creek, where everyone knew each other by name. It was a peaceful place, far from the bustling cities and filled with friendly faces. But this tranquility would soon be shattered by an event that left its mark on everyone who lived there. The story begins at exactly 10:47 p.m., when Emma, a curious college student returning home for the weekend, decided to take a shortcut through the old abandoned school building near her house. The air felt colder as she approached the towering structure, its windows cracked and boarded up. A faint moonlight filtered through the clouds, casting eerie shadows across the empty playground. Emma paused, glancing around nervously. Her heart pounded softly against her chest, but curiosity drove her forward. She had heard rumors about strange occurrences at the school since she was a child, tales whispered among friends during sleepovers or late-night campfires. Yet, nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. As Emma stepped inside the dimly lit hallway, the creaking floorboards echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. The smell of damp wood and mildew filled the air, making her wrinkle her nose slightly. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as if the weight of history pressed down upon her shoulders. The walls were covered in peeling paint, revealing patches of faded colors beneath. Old posters still clung to some surfaces, remnants of long-forgotten school events, and dust-covered lockers lined either side of the corridor. Suddenly, a chilling whisper broke the stillness. "Who's there?" Emma called out cautiously, her voice trembling slightly. There was no immediate answer, just the haunting sound of wind whistling through broken window panes. However, something deeper stirred within the shadows ahead. Shapes began forming, not human, not quite animal, but distorted figures moving silently along the edges of her vision. They darted between corners, vanishing before they could be fully seen. Emma froze, fear gripping her like icy fingers. Her breath hitched audibly, each intake shallow and quick. Then came another noisy, rhythmic tapping sound, almost like footsteps echoing far away. It grew louder, closer, until it seemed to surround her completely. Panic surged through her veins, urging her legs into motion. She turned sharply and ran back toward the entrance, her sneakers slapping against the wooden floors. But as she reached the door, it slammed shut violently behind her, locking itself without anyone touching it. The sudden movement sent a wave of terror coursing through her body. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the handle, trying desperately to pry it open. Outside, the world remained calm, under the watchful gaze of the crescent moon, unaware of the chaos unfolding within those crumbling walls. Inside, the shadow figures grew bolder, emerging fully now from their hiding places, their forms twisted unnaturally, elongated limbs stretching impossibly thin, while grotesque heads swiveled unnaturally. Eyes glowed faintly red, reflecting an unnatural intelligence. One figure stepped directly in front of Emma, blocking her path. Its mouth opened wide in a silent scream, teeth jagged and menacing. Emma screamed aloud this time, her voice piercing the oppressive atmosphere. Desperation fueled her actions as she searched frantically for any escape route. To her right lay the auditorium doors, slightly ajar despite being locked years ago. Without hesitation, she bolted towards them, pushing hard against the resistance. The doors groaned loudly as they gave way, allowing her passage into the cavernous room beyond. The auditorium was even darker than the hallways, save for the faint glow emanating from the emergency exit sign high above. Rows of seats stretched endlessly before her, all tilted slightly upward toward the stage. Dust particles floated lazily in beams of light, filtering through cracks in the ceiling. As Emma tiptoed carefully down the aisles, avoiding loose boards that might betray her position, she noticed something peculiar. The seats closest to the stage bore carvings etched deeply into the wood. Symbols unfamiliar yet disturbingly intricate adorned every surface. Her mind raced trying to make sense of it all when suddenly, the lights flickered on momentarily, illuminating the entire space. On the stage stood several shadow figures, arranged neatly in rows as though performing some macabre play. Their movements synchronized perfectly, creating patterns too complex for random chance. When the lights went out again, Emma found herself paralyzed with dread, unable to move or breathe properly. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours, time lost meaning amidst such overwhelming fear. Gradually, the presence of the shadow figures diminished, retreating once more into the recesses of darkness. Eventually, Emma managed to unlock the main doors leading outside, stepping gratefully into the cool night air. Breathing heavily, she glanced one final time over her shoulder at the ominous silhouette of the school, before running all the way home. Back in safety, Emma tried explaining what happened to her parents, but disbelief clouded their expressions. Over subsequent days, she discovered similar accounts documented throughout Willow Creek's history students disappearing without trace, teachers reporting unexplained disturbances, and townsfolk refusing to venture near the property after dark. Some claimed the land itself carried curses tied to ancient rituals performed centuries earlier by settlers seeking protection from unknown forces. Despite warnings from locals, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter wasn't over. Nights became restless, plagued by vivid dreams featuring those same shadowy entities watching her from afar. Paranoia set in, manifesting as constant checking of locks and curtains drawn tightly shut. Even daylight offered little comfort anymore. One evening, armed with courage bolstered by research findings, Emma returned to the school accompanied by Marcus, her childhood friend equally intrigued by supernatural phenomena. Together, they vowed to uncover truths buried deep within these haunted halls. Armed with flashlights and recording equipment, they ventured cautiously inside, retracing Emma's previous steps while documenting everything meticulously. At first, nothing unusual occurred. Then, midway through the second floor, Marcus stopped abruptly, pointing towards a particular classroom door. Written in chalk on its surface appeared words neither recognized immediately. They remember. Chills rippled down both spines simultaneously. Before either could react further, the temperature dropped significantly, frost forming instantly on nearby surfaces. Within moments, shadow figures reappeared, circling the pair menacingly. This time, however, Emma noticed subtle differences among them, some carrying objects resembling tools or weapons, others wearing garments reminiscent of different eras spanning decades. Realization dawned slowly. These weren't mere ghosts trapped between worlds. They represented fragments of memories belonging to countless individuals connected somehow to this very location. With newfound determination, Emma and Marcus worked tirelessly deciphering symbols carved into furniture and decoding messages scrawled randomly throughout the building. Piece by piece, a horrifying picture emerged involving experiments conducted secretly during wartime aimed at harnessing psychic energies. Many participants perished tragically, their spirits forever bound to this cursed site. Armed with knowledge gleaned from their investigation, Emma devised a plan to sever ties binding the shadow figures to reality. Utilizing specific frequencies captured via recordings combined with chants translated from ancient texts, she hoped to release them finally. Execution proved perilous, requiring immense concentration amidst escalating attacks from enraged entities desperate to maintain their existence. Success arrived unexpectedly, marked by a blinding flash followed by profound silence. Exhausted but triumphant, Emma and Marcus exited the school together, leaving behind echoes of liberation resonating softly within its hollow chambers. Though peace restored temporarily, questions lingered unanswered regarding origins and purposes driving such malevolent presences. Life resumed normalcy eventually for residents of Willow Creek, though fewer dared approach the old school grounds ever again. For Emma, scars remained invisible yet indelible reminders of experiences transcending ordinary comprehension. And sometimes, late at night, she swore hearing faint whispers calling her name. Ghostly presence in family home. Ghostly presence in family home. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon in the small town of Maplewood, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. It was a typical evening in late October when Emily Carter first noticed something unusual about her family home. The air felt heavier than usual as she walked through the front door after a long day at work. She paused for a moment, taking in the familiar surroundings of the living room, the old wooden furniture that had been in the family for generations, the soft glow of the lamp on the side table, and the faint scent of lavender from her mother's favorite candles. It was around 7:30 p.m. when Emily first heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper coming from the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat as she stood frozen in place. "Hello?" She called out cautiously, her voice trembling slightly. There was no response, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the air like an invisible presence, paused with suspense. Emily's family had lived in this house for over 30 years. It was a charming two-story colonial-style home located on Elm Street, known for its creaky floorboards and ancient oak tree in the backyard. The house had always seemed full of life, filled with laughter and memories. But lately, strange things had been happening that couldn't be easily explained. A few weeks earlier, Emily's younger brother, Jake, had reported hearing footsteps in his bedroom late at night. He described them as slow and deliberate, moving back and forth across the ceiling above his bed. At first, he thought it might be their pet cat, Luna, but upon investigation, neither the cat nor any other explanation could account for the sounds. Emily remembered how Jake's usually cheerful demeanor had turned serious when he recounted the experience to their parents during dinner one evening. Pause for reflection. The following week, it was Emily's turn to experience something unexplainable. One morning around 5:45 a.m., she woke up to find her bedroom door slightly ajar, even though she distinctly remembered closing it before going to sleep. What made it more unsettling was the trail of cold spots leading from her bed to the doorway. When she mentioned it to her mother, Margaret, she received a knowing look that suggested her mother had experienced similar phenomena in the past, but never spoke about it openly. Margaret Carter, a woman of deep faith and practical nature, shared her own encounter one rainy afternoon while folding laundry in the basement. She claimed to have seen a shadowy figure standing at the bottom of the stairs, watching her silently. The figure disappeared as soon as she turned to get a better look, leaving behind only the faint smell of vanilla and cinnamon, scents that reminded her of her deceased grandmother who used to live in the house many years ago. Pause with emotional weight. As days turned into weeks, The occurrences became more frequent and varied. Sometimes it was the sound of children laughing in the distance, though there were no children living nearby. Other times, it was the inexplicable movement of objects, a picture frame turning itself around, a chair scooting across the floor without anyone touching it. Each incident left the family members questioning their own sanity and searching for rational explanations. One particularly chilling evening, around 11:00 p.m., the entire family gathered in the living room after hearing multiple knocks on the walls throughout the house. The pattern was unmistakable. 3 sharp raps followed by a pause, then 2 more. It seemed to be coming from different parts of the house simultaneously. Emily's father, Thomas, a man who rarely showed fear, admitted later that night how the experience had shaken him to his core, paused with tension. Despite these unsettling events, the Carters refused to leave their beloved home. Instead, they decided to document everything systematically, keeping a journal of dates, times, and specific details of each occurrence. This methodical approach helped them identify patterns and establish connections between seemingly random events. They also reached out to local paranormal investigators, hoping to gain insight into what was happening within their walls. The investigators conducted several sessions using specialized equipment to measure electromagnetic fields, temperature fluctuations, and audio recordings. During one session, they captured an electronic voice phenomenon, EVP, that sounded remarkably like a woman's voice, saying, "Help me," in a language unfamiliar to everyone present. This discovery added another layer of mystery to the situation, suggesting that perhaps multiple entities were involved. Throughout this challenging period, the Carters maintained open communication with each other, sharing their experiences without judgment or ridicule. They established routines to help manage the stress, such as nightly check-ins where they would discuss any new developments and support each other emotionally. Pause for compassion. As time passed, the family began noticing subtle changes in the nature of the haunting. What once felt threatening gradually evolved into something more protective and guiding. Objects started appearing in places where they were most needed. A misplaced key found right before rushing out the door. A comforting blanket draped over a chair during a particularly stressful day. These instances suggested that whatever presence inhabited their home might not be entirely malevolent. By embracing both the fear and curiosity surrounding their supernatural experiences, the Carter family learned valuable lessons about resilience, trust, and understanding. They discovered that sometimes the unknown can bring people closer together rather than drive them apart. And though the ghostly presence remains an integral part of their lives, it has transformed from a source of terror into a unique aspect of their family legacy, a story passed down through generations, reminding them all of the mysteries that lie beyond our comprehension. Instances suggested that whatever presence inhabited their home might not be entirely malevolent. By embracing both the fear and curiosity surrounding their supernatural experiences, the Carter family learned valuable lessons about resilience, trust, and understanding. They discovered that sometimes the unknown can bring people closer together rather than drive them apart. And though the ghostly presence remains an integral part of their lives, it has transformed from a source of terror into a unique aspect of their family legacy, a story passed down through generations, reminding them all of the mysteries that lie beyond our comprehension. Disappeared hiker near cursed cabin. The sun was setting over the dense Appalachian Mountains, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. It was late October, and autumn's golden hues painted the forest in shades of orange, red, and yellow. The crisp air carried a chill that hinted at the approaching winter. In this serene yet foreboding landscape, an ordinary day turned into something far more sinister. This is the story of Matthew Carter, a 34-year-old hiker from Asheville, North Carolina. A seasoned outdoorsman with years of experience exploring the wilderness, Matthew had always been drawn to the remote corners of the Appalachians. On this particular afternoon, he decided to venture near the infamous Black Hollow Cabin, a dilapidated structure nestled deep within the forest. Local legends spoke of strange occurrences around the cabin, but Matthew dismissed these tales as mere folklore. At approximately 2:45 p.m., Matthew parked his vehicle at the designated trailhead just off Highway 19. He double-checked his gear water bottles filled to the brim, a sturdy backpack containing emergency supplies, and his trusty camera slung over his shoulder. As he stepped onto the winding dirt path, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath his boots echoed through the stillness of the woods. The temperature dropped noticeably as he ventured further away from civilization. Matthew's initial excitement quickly gave way to unease as he approached the cabin's location. Around 4:15 p.m., the sunlight began to fade, leaving the forest bathed in an eerie twilight. The trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching for the heavens. Strange sounds, rustling in the underbrush, distant whispers carried by the wind made his skin prickle with discomfort. Yet, driven by curiosity, he pressed on. By 5:00 p.m., Matthew stood before the cursed cabin itself. Its wooden walls were weathered and gray, covered in moss and vines that clung tenaciously to its surface. The roof sagged precariously, and one of the windows hung crookedly, its glass shattered long ago. A faint, acrid smell wafted from inside, making Matthew pause and reconsider entering. But his adventurous spirit prevailed, and he stepped cautiously onto the creaking porch. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive. Dust motes floated lazily in the dim light filtering through cracks in the walls. Furniture lay broken and overturned, as if some violent struggle had taken place decades ago. On the fireplace mantel, a single photograph caught Matthew's eye on, old black and white image of a family standing proudly in front of the same cabin. Their faces wore expressions of joy, starkly contrasting with the desolation surrounding them now. Matthew felt a pang of sadness mixed with curiosity. As he explored further, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Footsteps echoed faintly above him, though there was no second floor. A cold breeze swept through the room despite all windows being boarded up. At 6:15 p.m., Matthew realized it was time to leave. The sun had fully set, plunging the forest into darkness punctuated only by the glow of his flashlight. But as he stepped outside, panic gripped him. The familiar trail leading back to his car had vanished, replaced by an endless maze of identical-looking paths. The stars above offered little comfort. They seemed distant and indifferent. Matthew tried retracing his steps, but each turn led him deeper into the labyrinthine woods. His flashlight battery began to weaken, casting increasingly erratic beams of light. Around 8:30 p.m., exhaustion overwhelmed him. He found a relatively sheltered spot beneath a large oak tree and settled down to rest, hoping morning would bring clarity. But sleep eluded him. Shadows danced menacingly at the edge of his vision, and voices whispered unintelligible phrases in his ears. By midnight, Matthew's fear had reached a fever pitch. He screamed into the void, demanding answers, but none came. Search parties were organized the following day when Matthew failed to return home. Volunteers scoured the area, calling out his name and shining flashlights into the dense foliage. They discovered his abandoned vehicle at the trailhead and followed the faint footprints leading toward the cursed cabin. Inside, they found nothing but the dusty remnants of its past inhabitants. Outside, the trails remained as disorienting as ever. Days turned into weeks, and despite extensive efforts, no trace of Matthew Carter was ever found. Some theorized he became lost and succumbed to exposure or wild animals. Others believed the cursed cabin claimed another victim, pulling him into its eternal grip. Locals whispered about sightings a lone figure wandering aimlessly near the cabin, forever trapped in the forest's embrace. And so, the legend grew. The cursed cabin continued to stand as a silent sentinel, guarding its secrets while preying upon the unwary souls who dared approach. For those who listened closely, They say you can still hear Matthew's cries echoing through the trees, a haunting reminder of what lies beyond the safety of civilization. Demonic entity inside rural farmhouse. The sun was setting over the small town of Eldridge Hollow, casting long shadows across the fields that surrounded a modest farmhouse on the outskirts. It was late October, and autumn's chill had begun to settle into the air. The leaves were turning vibrant shades of orange and red, but for the residents of this quiet farmstead, there would be no peace in the days ahead. This is their story, a tale of fear, mystery, and an entity that defied all understanding. It began with strange noises, soft whispers at first, barely audible over the creaks of the old wooden beams in the house. John Carter, a 42-year-old farmer, had always been skeptical about supernatural phenomena. He believed in hard work, honest living, and the land he tilled every day. His wife, Emily Carter, shared his practical outlook on life, though she often joked about how eerie the countryside could feel after dark. They lived with their 2 children, Mark, aged 12, and Lily, who was just 8 years old. Together, they formed a close-knit family, bound by love and mutual respect. One evening, as the family gathered around the dining table for dinner, something unusual happened. A sudden gust of wind swept through the house despite all windows being firmly shut. Candles flickered wildly before extinguishing themselves one by one. For a moment, silence enveloped the room, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then came the sound of a low growl emanating from the basement door. John stood up cautiously, his chair scraping against the floorboards. "Stay here," he said firmly, grabbing a flashlight from the counter. Emily nodded nervously, pulling Mark and Lily closer to her. As John descended the narrow staircase leading to the basement, the growling grew louder, almost like it was following him step by step. Pause. He reached the bottom and shone the light into the dim space. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance. Shelves lined with jars of canned goods, tools hanging neatly on hooks, and crates stacked against the walls. But then he saw Ida's shadow moving where no shadow should exist. It darted across the far wall so quickly that John blinked twice to confirm what he'd witnessed. His heart pounded as he turned back toward the stairs, calling out to his family above. "Emily, get everyone outside now." There was urgency in his voice, a tone none of them had ever heard before. Upstairs, panic set in as Emily ushered the children out the front door while trying to maintain composure. Outside, under the pale glow of the full moon, they huddled together, watching the house warily. Inside, faint scratching sounds echoed through the walls, growing more insistent with each passing second. That night marked the beginning of a series of unexplainable events. Doors slammed shut without anyone touching them. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways. Objects disappeared only to reappear in different locations hours later. Most disturbing of all were the voice muffled yet distinct, speaking words no one could understand. That night marked the beginning of a series of unexplainable events. Doors slammed shut without anyone touching them. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways. Objects disappeared only to reappear in different locations hours later. Most disturbing of all were the voices muffled yet distinct, speaking words no one could understand. These occurrences weren't limited to nighttime either. During daylight hours, the atmosphere inside the farmhouse became oppressive, as if unseen eyes watched their every move. As days turned into weeks,